Hello, ladies and gentlemen. In this episode of our app development series, the concept we're going to focus on is the list view. And as the name implies, a list view is a way for you to view a list of items, which for us is going to be a list of games for a particular day. Before we begin, I want to make a couple of adjustments to our project. We decided in the last video that we would use the home screen as a test screen, or a way for us to experiment with code while it's under development. So I want to make that a little bit more clear by renaming it to test screen. So I'm going to come over here to the file, and I'm going to rename it to test screen. And I will also rename the class to test screen, which I've already done. Now you'll see we get an error on the right side because the project is looking for a file called homescreen.js, which no longer exists. So we're going to open up the navigation folder and go into the main tab navigator. And anywhere we see the home screen, we're going to change it to test screen. And we could probably use find and replace for this, but just to be safe, I want to look at each place individually. I think that's all of them, so I'll do a search for home to make sure I didn't miss anything. And I will save and reload the application. And we now have a test screen. So in this project, like I said, we want to make a list of the games for a particular day. So we'll have a new tab called Games. And since we have two other tabs here, I think we'll just do the same exact thing we did for home screen and rename the links page to the games page. So I'm going to come over to the links screen and I'm going to rename it to games screen. And I've also already changed the class name. And then in the main tab navigator, I'm going to do the same thing, which is replace all the links with games. I think that's all, so I'll search for links to make sure I didn't miss anything, and I will save and reload the application. And everything looks good. We have the word games down here for our games tab, but I don't really like the icons that are currently being used, so I want to change those. And the way the icons are being presented now is every tab has a navigation options, which has a tab bar icon property. And then there's this component tab bar icon that's passing in a name of an icon. And the tab bar icon can be found in our components folder under tab bar icon right here. And we can see that it's using the Ionicons icon library. I actually prefer to use the Material Community Icons library, so I'm going to change that. So I'll change this to be Material Community Icons. And I always make it as icon, so that way in our markup we can refer to the elements as icon. And then if you want to change the icon library in the future, you can just change this word right here. We could change it back to Ionicons, and we won't have to change any of our markup. So I'm going to save that, and we should get an error that the icon names don't exist because every icon library has a different name. So I'm going to come back to the main tab navigator, and I'm going to find three icons from the Material Community Icons website that I like a little bit better. So for our test screen, I'm going to search for something like a code type of icon. So I'll do a search on code. And I kind of like these angle brackets here, so I see that the name is code-tags. So I'm going to come over here and change the name of my icon to code tags. For the games tab, I think I'll do a search for game and see what happens there. And it looks like these are more video game related icons, so maybe I'll do a search for baseball. And there we have a baseball and a baseball bat, so why don't we make this one the baseball bat icon. So I will change the name here to baseball bat. And then finally for settings, I think we can just do a search for settings. And maybe this gear icon will work. The name is just settings. So we'll change this one to be settings. Save and refresh. And everything worked except for the baseball bat icon. It's still telling us that the baseball bat icon doesn't exist. So why don't we change it to baseball and see if that works. That's not working either, so I guess we'll have to find something. It may be that we have an older version of the icon library and some of these icons aren't available. So I'm not sure what to put there. I guess we'll just, why don't we go with the gamepad one for now, and we'll change that a little bit later. It's not a big deal if the gamepad one works. Okay, there we go. So on our games page now, we will have a list of the games for a particular day. And we're going to use a list view to display that. Okay, so I'll close out of a few of these files here, and I'll open up my game screen file. And if you recall from the previous video, we had created an API that will get us a list of games for a particular day. So we're going to want to use that API in our game screen. So I'm going to copy and paste this code right here, which imports the MLB Game Day API file that we created. And then I will create a constructor in our class. And don't forget to call super props. And we want the date eventually to be changeable, so we need to add that to our state. So I'll initialize a state here by saying this.state equals, and we'll give it a property called date. And that date is going to, for now, we're going to hardcode that to, let's say, May 24th, 2018. And I believe the months are 0 indexed, so May will actually be 4. And then we'll set 24. And eventually, like I said, we may add some sort of calendar component that allows you to change the date. And then if it's going to change, it needs to be in the state. All right. And now we will copy and paste this code right here, just so we don't have to rewrite it. And this is the code that takes a date and gets the list of games for that day. So let's think. Well, we'll paste this right here, but I think we'll also want to add something in our state to hold these list of games here. So why don't we make one called games, and it will just be an empty array for now. And then here we will call the API to get the list of games. And inside of here, what we want to do is this.setState games equal to URLs. However, we can't reference this inside of this callback unless we bind it by doing this. So let's try that out. I'm going to save and refresh. And we should still see our URLs in the console, so I'll switch over to this tab, look in our console, and there's the list of URLs. Okay, so that seems to be working. Now we can get started on our list view. So I'm going to pull up the list view documentation on the React Native website. And as you can see in the top line, it says it's deprecated, and what we should actually use is a flat list or a section list. And I believe a section list is something where you can have headers, like in your contacts page, you might have a header for A's, for all names that start with A, B, C. For us, we'll just use a flat list because we're just going to be displaying a couple of games per day. So I'll come over to the flat list, and they give you some documentation on how to do it. It basically just takes a data argument and a render item argument. So back in our code, we need to import flat list from React Native. And if you recall from the previous video, we also decided to use a UI library called React Native Elements. The reason I chose this one is because I thought it would be boring if we spent a lot of time in the videos making really basic UI components. And this one seems to be popular, it's open source, and it has great documentation, so I thought it would be a good choice. So I'll click on the components page, and down here they have a lists section. And they can show you all the types of list items that they are able to display. It looks good, and they even give you a lot of examples. They actually don't even require you to use the React Native list view or flat list. You could use the React Native elements list, but I want to have some experience with the React Native flat list, so I'm going to come and use that instead. And they actually have some examples using the React Native list view, which we now know is deprecated. So I think we'll just have to figure out the flat list on our own. But at the very least, we can use the list item from React Native Elements. So I'm going to import list item from React Native Elements as well. And for some reason, the app has crashed, so I'm going to relaunch this in the simulator. Okay, so before we get too ambitious with displaying our list of games, why don't we try to hard code the data first and then make sure we can get a list view with hard-coded data, and then we'll swap that out for the data from the API. So if we come back to the FlatList documentation, it looks like the FlatList needs an attribute called data, which is just an array, and it looks like it has an item called key, and then it takes a render item attribute also, which is a function that tells you how to render a particular item. So let's hard-code our games array to have some data in here. So we'll say key is A, and key B, and key C. So we'll just try to display a list of games that are just A, B, C. Let's come down here and create a function called render list item. And I believe that this takes the whole item as an argument. So we can say item, and I'll have access to the item, which will be this object right here for whichever item we're currently on. And to render it, why don't we import text from React Native, and we'll just return text item.key text. And I believe that's exactly what they're doing here. Perfect. Okay, and then in our main render function, let's create a flat list. And we'll say data equals this.state.games, and render item equals this.render list item. And then we'll end our flat list. And just double check that everything looks good. Okay, so I'll save and refresh. Come over to our games tab, and as you can see, we now have a list of all of our games. And we also have a warning here that says missing keys for items, make sure to specify a key property. So this is a common problem whenever you have a list of items, they ask you to have a key. And I believe what happened here was, although our hard-coded games data has a key property, we were setting it in the callback to our API to this URLs thing, which does not have a key. So I'm just going to comment that out for now while we do some experimenting. And I'll refresh. And we can see now we have our list of items and the warning has gone away. But in the future, we're going to need to add a key, so I'm going to make a note for myself to do that. Okay, the next thing I want to do is change the list item from a plain text item to an actual list item element from our React Native Elements library. So I'm going to come over to the React Native Elements documentation page and see how they have done this, and it looks like they've got a list item, and it has a key property, which we need, and a title property. So why don't we try just changing it to a title. So instead of text in our render list item, we're going to return a list item, and we'll remember to set our key equal to item.key, and we'll set the title equal to item.key as well. Okay, and now we have a good looking list item. It even has the arrow for us, so if we wanted to click on it, we could go to a new page. So now that that's looking good, let's go back to setting the data for the actual games. So in this callback, we get an array of URLs, and I think what we want to do is update the API to give us a little bit more information. I'm going to add the key to that array. We could also add the key inside of this function, but I think it might be more beneficial to just have the API return some sort of unique key. And we're also going to want to add additional information as well, because the URL is not enough. We also want to get some information about what teams are playing and things like that. So in the API here, as you can see, this is where we were grabbing the URL and just returning it. Now instead of doing that, I think we want to return an object. So we'll return an object with a property called URL equal to the URL, and a property called key, which we'll also set to the URL because that should be unique to the collection. And so instead of returning just a plain URL, we're now returning this object. And we're also going to add to that the teams that are playing in just a couple of minutes. So now if I save that, now this no longer returns an array of URLs, it returns an array of objects which has a URL property in it. And so I think we're good to uncomment this, and now we can set our game's state property to the data that we received from the API. So if I save and refresh, we should see now we have all of the games. And you might have seen that briefly we had the ABC in there. That's because we were seeing that until this callback returned and the network data was received. I'm going to delete this and just leave a blank array. And so now while that's loading, we should see a blank. It loads pretty quickly, so we won't see it very, very long. And then we see the URL. And the reason that we're seeing the URL is because we decided to set the title equal to the item.key, which also happens to be the URL. All right, so what we want to do now is add a little bit more information, such as what teams are actually playing. So I'm going to jump over to the MLB API, and remember we were getting our data from the epg.xml file here, so I'll open that up. And if we look through here, we get a lot of information about each game. And what I'd like to know is the name of the team that's playing. So as I'm scanning through, I see there's a home team name property, and there should be an away team name property as well. So let's look for that. I can also search for it. Away team name. There it is. So we have the White Sox and the Orioles. So I think I want to pull out this data, and I also want to pull out, I noticed that there's a home team ID and an away team ID. And there's also a home file code and an away file code. I'm not sure exactly what the difference there is, but I do know that it's a lot easier to read CWS and know that that's the Chicago White Sox and BAL is the Baltimore Orioles, rather than remembering that 110 is the Orioles and 145 is the White Sox. So I think I'm going to pull these codes here because they look like they're IDs that are unique to each team, and that might be useful in the future. And I'm going to pull the home team name and the away team name as well, because that's what I want to actually display in the UI. And we may actually want to grab the city as well, because then we could combine those. Although the home team city is not Chicago, it's something else. So I think we'll stick with these four things: away team name, home team name, away file code, and home file code. Okay, so I'm going to come over here and grab some more properties. I'm going to say away team ID equals game.attributes, and this was away, let me check it again, away file code. And then we'll say var home team ID equals game.attributes home file code. And then away team name equals game.attributes. And let me double check what that one's called. It was called away team name. So away team name. And finally, the home team name equals game.attributes home team name. Now that I have all this data, I'm going to add it to my return object. So I'll reformat this a little bit. And I'll say away team ID is away team ID. Home team ID is home team ID. Away team name is away team name. And home team name is home team name. And I did want to point out there's a shortcut for doing this sort of thing. If you have the properties have the exact same name as your variables, you can actually just do it like this: return URL, away team ID, home team ID, and so on. I kind of just do this way out of habit, but if you like doing this method, it is actually a lot more concise, so you can do that if you'd like. Okay, anyway, I'm going to save that, and now we should be getting back from our API a lot more information. assuming that we did everything correctly. So now in our render list item, instead of making the title equal to the key, we can set up the names of the teams instead. So I think I'll create a variable here called title, and let's set that equal to item.away team name, and then an @ symbol, and then item.home team name. So it'll look like, in this case, and a plus here, the away team was the Orioles, so it'll say Orioles at White Sox, which is a common way of indicating that the Orioles are playing at the White Sox stadium. Now I'm going to change the title to be equal to the title here. Save and refresh, and let's see what it looks like. Okay, took a little bit of time to refresh there, but now we see that we have all of the games for that particular day. So I'm pretty happy for that, and I think I'm going to stop the video here. That's the basics of the list view, and in upcoming videos we're going to enhance this list view even more and make it look even better. So thanks for watching the video.